Deedy is a lifelong Texas gardener, and she likes to laugh. And she's been an active member of the Native Plant Society of Texas since 1996. She's completed Texas Invaders training on invasive plants and multiple native plant courses at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. She served on the steering committee of the Native Landscape Certification Program for several years. She's an NLCP instructor and has served on the subcommittee to write Level 4. In addition, she was a master gardener for 15 years in the Bexar and Guadalupe counties. Deedy has taught adult continuing education classes on various gardening topics in the San Antonio, New Braunfels area. Tonight, Deedy will be talking to us about, I'm being invaded, what can I do? And her presentation, well, you know what? We'll just let Deedy talk about her presentation. Welcome, please welcome Deedy Wright.
Thank you, ma'am. Let me see if I can get this going. All right, thank you for this opportunity to talk about invasive plants. It's a problem that's getting worse in our state. Before I start the program, I would like to put in a plug for our new NIPSOT Standing Committee, and I don't know why this is advancing. We have a new NIPSOT Standing Committee on invasive plants, and the committee is asking the help of local chapters in putting together a data bank of ecoregion specific invasives and their possible native plant replacements. The bank would also include why each invasive is of concern. And we'd like to do something similar to the handout that I sent in for this presentation. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about some common invasives in Comal County, which includes the Blackline Prairie and the Hill Country. So this is not an exhaustive list of either invasives or replacements. It's a beginning. So just curious, does anybody recognize this lovely yellow plant in the picture?
Yeah.
Wonderful name. Yeah, we'll be talking about it. Okay. So what is an invasive species? And this is our new official NIPSOT definition. It is a species that is non-native to a particular region or environment and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. That is now our official NIPSOT definition of what we're talking about. So why are they here? Well, many reasons. You know, we all like something that's different and unique. And so some of these exotic things are really cool. Some people like plants that are easy to care for, and the non-natives aren't bothered by insects and diseases because most of our insects and diseases don't recognize them, so they're easy to care for. Invasives, so, tend to be unique. They're oftentimes evergreen, which many of our natives are not. Oftentimes they have large flowers and they flower for a long period of time, which many of our natives don't do because that takes a whole lot of energy and water and resources, and they want to conserve. Oftentimes these invasives are cheap and easy to grow, and they are in the nurseries. They make a lot of money off of them. So this is not just a what is best issue. This is an economic issue because many of the plants I'm going to talk about, like the one on this page, are widely sold in nurseries. So it is an economic thing. These invasives fill a niche that is not filled by our natives. They look a little different. They behave a little differently. And finally, they oftentimes remind people of home. I know people from the north who like lilacs, which will not grow here. I think the nursery industry was very clever when they named the Vitex, the Texas lilac. I think that sold a lot of plants. So why should we care? What difference does it make if we have all these plants? Well, to begin with, they cost you tax money. Somewhere in the vicinity of $137 billion a year nationally to clear them out of parks, get them off of our roads. And in agriculture, it is a huge issue in agriculture to keep them out of the field. Secondly, they really damage our environment by doing several things, and you're going to be hearing me say a lot of this stuff again and again because this is what they do. They can actually change the pH of the soil when their leaves fall and decay. They can introduce foreign mycorrhizal fungi, which are not friendly to our natives. I had thought for a long time there was only one kind of fungi, but there are thousands. They can replace our natives because they can grow faster because they're not having to deal with all the normal controls to growth that our natives have to contend with. And oftentimes we help them too. We give them a little more water, a little more fertilizer, make sure that they're not too threatened. With their poisonous leaves and seeds and other parts of their anatomy, these invasives can threaten wildlife because they're poisonous. And it can also kill people. Birds are particularly susceptible to seeds and berries that are poisonous. And by doing all of these things together, they threaten the ecosystem services by decreasing our biodiversity. And I think earlier today we've had programs about how insects are decreasing and various things are just not growing like they used to. So this is adding to it. And by the way, that lovely yellow flower has a wonderful name called bastard cabbage. And somebody commented, you know, oftentimes you can get rid of stuff if you eat it. And supposedly there for a while, if this isn't in the mustard family, they were trying to figure out ways that you could eat it, but evidently either it was too hard to do or it wasn't very tasty. I don't know which. So what makes a plant invasive? There are several things. And again, you're going to be hearing these things repeated. First of all, they will grow just about anywhere. They're not that particular about soil. They can put up with a lot of problems because remember, they're not dealing with the normal controls that our native plants have to deal with. They left all the pests and the diseases back where they came from. They really like disturbance. So with all of the growth that's going on in our area with soil being disturbed by building roads, building houses, building businesses, it's a perfect place for them to come in and start growing. They generally grow really fast because, again, they don't have any of the controls that would keep them from growing fast. They can reproduce just as fast and do it in several different ways. They oftentimes produce lots of seeds that are viable and come up. They have ways of distributing those seeds that they can get them out and about. The seeds usually have a high germination rate. And they use vegetative reproduction, which are runners, suckers, rhizomes, stuff that goes under the soil and then pops up. Now, that's not to say that some of our natives don't do some of this. They do. But these invasives tend to really work on this, which is why they're so successful. And again, they've left behind all the normal controls that would take care of a lot of this issue. So who decides what's invasive? Well, officially, it's the Texas Department of Agriculture. They have what is called the Noxious and Invasive Plant List, which is online, and you can look it up. It's kind of upsetting when you see what's there because there are not a whole lot of plants. But other groups have them too. Parks and Wildlife have their prohibited exotic species that is publicized. The USDA Forest Service, the City of Austin, USDA, Invaders of Texas, many, many lists. But the only one that carries any official legal weight is the one at the Texas Department of Agriculture. And as we have found out, it is very, very difficult. It's a very involved process, and it's hard to get another plant on there. There are some we really need to work on, but they're not there yet. So what is legally invasive? Here are a few. The Brazilian pepper tree, Chinese tallow is actually on there, and so is the giant reed or the Arundodon. Kudzu, which in my area isn't an issue. Purple loosestrife salt cedar, which is big along the Rio Grande. water hyacinth in lakes, tropical soda apple, Japanese dodder. That's just some of them. If you want to see them all, there is the link that would take you to that list on the website. So how many plants are invasive? In total, 30. That's all they have on their list officially. And again, here are the other lists that you can look at. And by the way, take a look at this picture, because this is a ligustrum forest. This is not too far from my house. It is virtually impenetrable. It's very difficult to walk through. You'd be crazy to try it. And you'll notice there's nothing growing on the ground. So that brings up something that our committee discovered. Whoops, went back one. And that is this chart, which is an illustration of what is called infestational lag. This is about the Chinese privet. It was originally brought to the United States around 1880. It behaved itself for a long time. And you'll notice starting about in 1940, it began to break out a bit. And then around the late 50s, it really started to move up. And look at it in 2000. It has absolutely exploded. And this is one of the reasons, even though plants are said not to be aggressive or invasive, they're non-native, we don't know. Because for many years, the Chinese privet didn't break out of cultivation, it behaved itself. But they're growing beings. They will try to adapt. They will try to do better than they're doing. That's what plants do. And look at what happened. So it's very challenging to figure out which one of these non-native plants will become a future invasive. In fact, it's probably impossible, because as the Chinese privet, when it was first introduced, it behaved. But then suddenly, again, like the privet, it became invasive and really moved out. So this is a common phenomenon that we're seeing. Now, that's not to say that every non-native is going to do this, because I don't think we really know. This is something that's fairly new that we're learning about. So let's take a look at some of the invasive plants locally and some of the native replacements that we can use. We'll start with the Chinese tallow, good old tallow. Its leaves and fruits and sap are all toxic to humans and most animals. It's really bad if it's growing in a riparian area. And if you will notice, this tree is growing beside a lake. I took this picture in Fisher Park here in New Braunfels. And Fisher Park is absolutely loaded with these things. They produce literally thousands of seeds. One tree can produce more than 100,000 seeds per year for up to 100 years. Now just stop and think about that kind of production. And if it's by water, like this one is, the seeds can be dispersed by water or by birds. I remember when I was growing up, these were very popular to put in your yard, and people called them popcorn trees, because when the seeds mature, they kind of pop open and they're white. And I can remember a lot of these cute little handicraft projects that they have kids do, and we used these as the base. And so we were helping that tree spread its seeds. Amazing. And you can see down here in the picture, here's a little white, that's a mature seed right there. And you can see where it's popping open there. I mean, they are kind of pretty. They are kind of interesting. It can not only spread by seeds, it also can spread by root sprouts. And as it sheds its leaves every year, and especially if they go into the water, it can start to decompose, and it can change the chemistry of that water by enriching it with the dissolved nutrients, and phosphorus, or the phosphates rather, are some of the worst of them, which stimulates aquatic growth and sucks all the oxygen out of the water, which is really bad for fish. So these things growing along rivers or lakes or streams is not good. And the decaying leaves on the ground also increase the nitrogen and phosphorus. So it changes the pH of the soil around them so that it can get to the point that our natives don't like it and won't grow there. It's kind of perturbing. It's very efficient. What is interesting, it's called tallow because it does have tallow in the seeds. But in China, where they got this from, obviously, they did successfully extract that tallow and they used it for candles and stuff like that. But for some unknown reason, when the trees came over here, they couldn't manage to get enough tallow out of them to make them worth their while. It was too expensive to do it, and they didn't really have that much of a market. So we have these trees. They've been here since, I believe, Thomas Jefferson was the one who brought the first one. So what can we replace those with? Well, based on the fact that many people planted those trees for their fall color, because they're pretty reliable in having good fall color, there are several. The cedar elm oftentimes has good fall color. The big tooth maple, if the weather's right, it is gorgeous. The Texas red oak is fairly reliable. And the Texas redbud can have golden leaves in the fall sometimes. And that's the problem. Our natives are not dependable. The Chinese tallow is pretty darn dependable. But these are all trees that would grow in our area. Chinaberry. As a kid, this was one of my favorites because my cousin and I used to have chinaberry fights with a pea shooter. I mean, we were good at it. And I look back on it now thinking, oh my Lord, the berries are poisonous. I don't ever remember us eating any. We didn't get sick. But, you know, we didn't know. We were kids. They were fun. The leaves are hard to digest, so very few insects eat it. The leaf litter, like the Chinese tallow, when it decomposes on the ground, will change the pH. It raises it, and that makes it unfriendly for some of our native plants. It disperses itself quite well with these seeds because oftentimes birds eat it, and birds can just gorge themselves on the crazy thing. But it also does root sprouts, just again, like the Chinese tallow. And because the leaves are not friendly for insects to eat, it repels them. So it's really not a good tree. But it also gives you good fall color. It has nice golden yellow leaves, pretty reliably. So what could we plant? Well, probably the best, the closest, is the Western soapberry. It has berries very similar to the Chinaberry. The difference is the soapberry leaves are translucent and the Chinaberries are not. They're just kind of a gold. But the Texas red oak has good color, and oftentimes the Chinkapin oak will have good color in the fall. And they're both fairly good sized trees, which the Chinese tallow can get rather large. Tree of Heaven. This has been classified as one of the most invasive trees in America. It's lovely. You can see from the picture, it has lovely big leaves on it. The smaller pictures at the bottom, the kind of lemony yellow, those are the blooms. And then the more reddish, those are the seeds. A female tree, and they are male and female, a female tree can produce 300,000 seeds a year. Let's think of that. It outdoes the Chinese tallow. It also has root sprouts like the other one. And these seeds, those red things in that picture, are dispersed by wind. They blow. So you know that they get out and about a lot. The other really cool thing about this tree is that it puts out chemicals around it from its roots that will kill surrounding plants, and so that it doesn't have competition. The roots tend to be on the top of the soil, kind of like an Arizona ash tree, and it can go under sidewalks or driveways and crack them. It can, back in the days when we had the sewer lines that were more porous, it could also break sewers. Now, it may also be able to break the plastic ones now, I don't know. And it can cause problems with your foundation because it can go under and lift it up. So it's not a good tree from that standpoint. It's really, really hard to kill, just like all the others. When you cut it, you don't let it sit. If you're going to use any kind of herbicide, you have to spray it immediately because it will scab over in a matter of a few minutes, and then the herbicide can't get through. This is a European tree that people thought were just lovely. So what could replace it with? Well, going back to the look of the leaves, the pecan would be a good substitute, as is the western soapberry. And I've heard any number of people say that they wish the western soapberry was more available. It's not the easiest tree to find in the nursery, but these would both be good replacements for the tree of heaven. The golden rain tree. I was horrified. I'm a TCU graduate, and several years ago, I went back to campus just to see what it looked like. It was in the spring, and there were these trees that were absolutely golden with all of their colors all over that campus. I was horrified, like, oh no. And I suppose I don't give enough money because I don't have much pull. But I thought, what a terrible example. Yes, they are lovely. They have these really, really pretty golden, a golden rain tree. The other thing is, down here in this little picture, those are the seeds. And once again, they are wind distributed. They blow. My aunt lives in Houston, and her neighbor had one of these trees. She was older, she couldn't take care of it, and she ended up with a rain tree forest in her backyard because of all these seeds that came over. So they really do come up. Once again, this tree has roots that has a chemical that will kill any surrounding plants, so it keeps any competition away. It has root sprouts. They all seem to do that. It produces thousands of seeds, just like the other ones. And the birds, again, will eat them, or the wind and water will also distribute them. It doesn't care where it grows. It's not picky about its soil. It is drought tolerant, which gets it down into this area, and it's brittle. So these limbs can break easily in a bad storm, which is not good if you're on the coast. This came in 1763, so it's been here a very long time, and it has really, really spread. So what could you replace it with? Well, going back to the size of the tree, it's not that tall, and the fact that it has the pretty blooms on it. The Texas redbud would be a good replacement, or the American smoke tree would be another one that would be a good replacement. They're both small, and they have nice blooms on them, and they're not invasive. The Vitex or the Texas lilac. I have a behind the fence neighbor that is so proud that her daughter gave her one of these right up against my fence. And I did have a talk to her to tell her that it was invasive and that she really ought to be careful about where those seeds fell, because if it got into the drain on the street and went down to, we have a big catchment pond here, that it could cause problems. And I told her about the San Antonio River Authority's experience with these several years ago. It seems that when they had established the new museum reach on the river downtown, they planted a lot of these vitex. A couple of years later, we had a really, really hard rain. I mean, it was a gully washer. And a lot of these seeds had fallen on the ground and they washed into the river. And they went down the river, down to the Mission Reach, which is way at the other end. It's beyond downtown. And all of a sudden, they had thousands of these little seedlings from the vitex coming up all along the banks of the river. So they mobilized their volunteers and got out there and tried to get as many of them as they could. Now, I don't know if they've taken the vitex out along the museum reach. I haven't been down there, but I hope they have, because I think they kind of learned their lesson with this one. It is a Texas superstar. It is promoted by A&M and by the Master Gardeners. But it's a real shame. I wish they had found a better plant. It can spread aggressively. It is really hard to deal with, to get rid of. We tried to do that at my daughter's house. They had an old one there. It took us 2 years to kill that dude. and that was with a lot of Roundup. It will displace native plants. It can crowd them out. It's really, really bad in riparian areas and not as bad on dry land. So it should not be planted anywhere near a riparian area or where the seeds could run off into water. It does exacerbate allergies. Now, the positive part is it does attract pollinators and it does attract hummingbirds. And I've had a long talk with my other daughter who's just moved to Corpus. They have a big vitex in their backyard in the house that they just bought. And I've been saying, you really need to cut it down. Oh, but look at the hummingbirds and look at all the butterflies. I don't want to do that. So I don't know. This is an ongoing conversation that I'm having with them to try to point out that there are a lot of good natives they could put in there that would also attract pollinators and hummingbirds that would not be invasive. So what can you replace it with? Well, actually, there are quite a few choices. The red buckeye is one. It's kind of an unusual plant. It's not easy to find, particularly. The Mexican buckeye, which we have in our sale on Saturday, is another good one. It has the pretty blooms on it. It also has unusual seeds. The kidney wood is another great pollinator plant. Everything in the world is also lightly fragrant. And the Anacacho orchid, which is another good pollinator plant and butterfly plant. Any of these would be a nice replacement. They don't get huge. In fact, they get about the same size as the vitex. So these are acceptable, and at least in our area. Golden bamboo. I have a story of a friend in San Antonio that bought a house in the older part of town, and his next door neighbor had a whole line of this stuff. My friend was a native plant person, and he was a member of the San Antonio chapter. He and his brother dug a 6-foot deep trench, poured it full of concrete to keep this stuff from coming into his yard. He did succeed, but I don't know how many people are willing to dig a 6-foot trench that was probably 15 or 20 feet long. It was a whole lot of work. He said he didn't know that he'd do it again. But these are really, really, really aggressive with their underground rhizomes. They pop up all kinds of places, and they don't just stay on the top of the ground, they go deep. So this one is a huge problem. People like it because it's a good screen. It's pretty impermeable. You're not going to get through it. It creates a monoculture. It takes over. You can see how thick this is. No animals could get through it, small animals, but nothing's going to grow in there but the bamboo. And it's especially bad in riparian areas like the vitex because it does like that water. You've got to stay at it if you're going to eradicate it. And then the other half of it is, it's not any value for our native wildlife. It doesn't give them much anything. It gives them cover, I guess. You know, small birds could get away from predators. But in terms of habitat, it's really not very good, but widely touted. Now, these alternatives, these replacements, part of them are grasses. Neither the Lindheimer muley nor the big blue stem is as large as the bamboo, but it does get pretty good size. The cherry laurel, you'll say, why are you doing a cherry laurel? It doesn't make any sense. Well, it can be used as a screen. Whoops. And that's what I was thinking. It does get large. It is pretty thick. It is evergreen. And if you had planted the bamboo as a big screen, this would work. You could mix it with some other things. So if you want the look of grass, you could go with the muley or the blue stem. Or Indian grass would also work if it gets fairly large. Large leaf privet. This is kind of an heirloom plant or a pass-along plant many years ago. We have got some ginormous ones with these black, purpley berries on them, which the birds eat freely and then fly off and deposit them elsewhere. It was a hedge plant. It's really kind of gotten out of control. It has chemicals that will inhibit insects digesting the leaves, so they pretty much leave it alone. The pollen is really bad if you have allergies or asthma, and it does produce large clusters of blooms in the spring. It gets large and it can shade out other plants, so that basically you end up with a monoculture. It grows fast, it gets big, and again, it colonizes by root sprouts. You're seeing this as a recurring, this is beginning to get repetitive. And it's spread by bird and animal dispersed seeds. So this is kind of sounding familiar. They all kind of have many of these traits. And again, it was from China and Europe. Been over here for a while. You know, you saw the privet chart showing how long it behaved itself until it didn't. So what can you plant instead? Well, several things. These are all evergreen, like the privet. So the cherry laurel is a possibility. The southern wax myrtle is a possibility. The evergreen sumac is a possibility. And they will function in the environment. I have found it interesting. I have a couple of wax myrtles. The birds seem to really like them because when it grows, it will put about 3 or 4 shoots at the end of the stem, and it forms a nice little cradle for the birds to put their nests in, which is kind of cool. So I've had several nests in my wax myrtles, and the squirrels seem to like it too. They don't nest in it, but they sure hide in it a lot. The cherry laurel has fruit that the birds like. And I was surprised, the evergreen sumac, which is blooming right now, it's a fall bloomer, attracts all kinds of butterflies. And a couple of years ago, mine was in full bloom, and it was simply covered with monarchs. So, you know, we seem to think monarchs only go to milkweed. Well, that's not true. If they're looking for nectar, they will go to these things. But the evergreen sumac does attract a whole lot of pollinators of different kinds. And then it will put on drupes that the birds will eat later. So these would be good replacements for the privet. I pulled Japanese ligustrum off separate because it seems to be used an awful lot right now. This is a picture of it in the spring when it's in full bloom. And it's escaped cultivation. It's everywhere. It replaces the natives because it grows fast, it grows big, it covers them up. It has almost no value for wildlife. The bees will go to the flowers. And I think maybe the birds eat the seeds, I don't know. But the pollen is bad again for allergies and asthma if you suffer from it. And last of all, it's real hard to kill. All of these are really hard to kill. It's kind of interesting. My mother was a gardener. She did not like natives because she called them weeds. She loved anything that wasn't a native. And this ligustrum was one of her favorite plants. She absolutely adored it. That and Vitex, she really loved them both. And it's like, oh, Mom, if only I could have gotten to you then to tell you. But there are things that we can plant that are native, that are a better thing to plant. The cherry laurel is another, it's evergreen. Barbados cherry is a semi-evergreen. Now, if it gets down into the low 20s, it will defoliate. But mine went through Snowmageddon, so they're tough plants. Miso is another, and its barometer plant is one of its names. Whenever we get rain, it turns itself purple, like the one in this picture, and they're absolutely gorgeous. If you can find a Lynn's Legacy variety, they are very, very fragrant, but they are hard to find. I'm looking right now, and I've been looking for 2 years. I haven't found one yet. I don't know what happened. The Barbados cherry also is fragrant. It blooms on and off in flushes, and it puts on little red berries that are called manzanitas, or little apples. And I'll tell you what, your mockingbird will thank you if you plant one of these because they love those little red berries. I had one in my front yard. I have several of these bushes in my front yard, but I had a mockingbird that lived out there until the neighborhood cats got him. But he used to fuss at me. If I walked out the door and he was in the midst of feeding, those were his bushes. You leave me alone. He was really cute. Large leaf lantana and the purple trailing and the white trailing and the yellow trailing, they're all non-native. And I have to admit, it hasn't been very long that I realized that this pink and cream, which I've heard called confetti, I thought it was native because that's what my grandmother down in South Texas grew. And I was really upset when I found out it was not. It comes into disturbed areas very easily. They come up, the birds eat the berries and plant them for you. They can create a monoculture. Unfortunately, the berries are poisonous to livestock and to humans. Now the birds can eat them, okay. Once again, they are alleliopathic. They release chemicals from their roots and their stems that suppress growth around them. They don't have any competition. They are difficult to control because they grow fast. And handling them, and this is true of the native as well as these non-natives, their leaves have got little hairs on them that can be very, very irritating. So if I'm working with lantanas, or as far as that goes, the Barbados cherry also, it's long sleeves and rose gloves, because if I get it on my skin, I'm going to regret it. It is like fire. And I've had arguments with people saying, oh no, this pink thing is native, it's growing everywhere. Yes, it is growing everywhere. No, it is not native, it is invasive. So there's only really one lantana that you can come back with, and that's our Texas, the urticoides. And I was told recently that in some of the hybridizing that's going on with lantanas, that now there is one of the Lantana camara, which is the invasive, that has been hybridized so that the blooms look just like the native. And it's like, well, how the devil do you tell the difference? Because they don't generally give you the scientific name at nurseries. So I'm kind of upset. Why did they have to do that? We had it already. But anyway, that's what's happened. That's upsetting. Nandina or heavenly bamboo. This is my neighbor's plant. She says she wants to get rid of it. And I said, well, if you don't do anything else, clip off the red berries. She doesn't. And I haven't gotten brave enough to go over and say, can I clip off your berries? And she had a cat for a long time. And actually, these berries are poisonous for cats, birds, animals, and kids. So you probably ought to cut the berries off. And I know that's one of the reasons that people plant them, is for the berries. But it can invade forest habitats. It will absolutely cover everything up. It spreads by berries, and it also spreads by rhizomes. And it is a bamboo. It is really, really, really hard to get rid of. It takes a lot of digging and a lot of persistence to continue to dig this stuff out. And evidently it is one of the best sellers in the nursery industry. I sure see a lot of it being used. Replacements. Now, these are based on the fact that, first of all, Nandina is evergreen and it produces red berries, but it also comes in different sizes. So there are several things here. One is agarita, which is evergreen. It does have red berries. It's medium tall, so it'd be kind of the average size Nandina. But for the smaller, there is a dwarf yopon that really doesn't, it's just green. It doesn't do much. It is a hybrid, but at least it's not invasive. The autumn sage, the Salvia greggii, comes in many colors, but if you're after the red, it does have a really pretty red variety. It is evergreen. Or the yopon holly, which is evergreen and has red berries on it and feeds the birds. And it gets really large, like some of the Nandinas can do. So it's a variety of sizes and little features. Japanese honeysuckle. I remember growing up with this. Again, my mother loved it. I was the one that would pull the little flowers off and stick your fingernail into the bottom of the stem and pull out the honey and eat it. We used to sit around in the neighborhood and defoliate, not defoliate, but take all the flowers off. The honeysuckle's doing that. It is very aggressive. It does smell good, but it is aggressive. And it can make a mat. It goes out and up. And so it can make a really, really thick mat, just cover everything. Not quite as bad as kudzu, but on the order of that. And as a result, it can shade out plants by simply covering them over with its long stems. And the mat gets heavy, and so it can collapse anything that's trying to grow up, which can cause malformed saplings. If you have small trees that are trying to come up, they may or may not be able to get through the mat. If they do get through it, they're going to have a very misshapen trunk because of their early life. It inhibits seed growth of natives. It has the chemical again. And it doesn't really offer much. The bees will go to the flowers because they do have nectar, but it doesn't offer much in terms of habitat for wildlife. So this is one that is very popular, and it's a really old plant. People have been growing this for a long time, and there's some sentimental value there. Some good replacements: the coral honeysuckle, which is also evergreen, just like the Japanese, and it will definitely feed the hummers. They love it, love it, love it because of that long tubular flower. And then it also sets berries, which the birds will eat. I've watched mockingbirds and cardinals eat the berries off of my coral honeysuckle vine. Another is the Carolina jasmine, and it's evergreen. It blooms, actually oftentimes it's even more yellow than this one in the spring. But it is a native. It will be much better for our environment than the Japanese honeysuckle. Giant cane, Arundodonax. This one is really troubling because it creates a monoculture pretty fast. And if you go in and you're trying to clean it out, if you break off any part of it and it gets into the water around, because it likes to grow near water, it likes the water, those little pieces will sprout. So you can go in meaning to clean it out and inadvertently create more plants, which is upsetting. And it's interesting, it puts on these seed heads, you can see them here, but it does not produce seeds. It does in its native habitat, but it doesn't here. So it does not spread by seeds. But it does spread by underground runners. If anything breaks off, it can root at the node and does quite easily. It also burns very easily and very hot. So it can, if it catches fire, which it can whenever it gets during the summertime, it can scorch the earth, but nothing else can be there. It'll kind of sterilize it, which is not good. It can alter the flow in streams because it does like to grow in ditches and streams and along lakes. And it can change the temperature of the water by shading it, which is not always good. And if these roots and stem fragments float downstream, wherever they catch, they will grow again. And it's kind of interesting. This is one that they have introduced. There's a test going on that started around 2005 to 2009. There are some critters that have been brought in by the USDA to attack these. These are the natural controls that they have in their where they come from. And there is a wasp, there is some scale, and there is a leaf miner that have all been brought in, and they seem to be working. They started in Texas along the Rio Grande because this is also called carrizo. It is a real problem. It sucks up lots of water, and it's a place that people can hide. And so they started along there, and it looks like this biological control may work. Now, of course, the next question, and it'll take a while before we know that, can these critters live on other things? that they don't think so. But then there have been other things brought in, like kudzu, by the USDA that turned out to be not so great. So let's hope it works, because this stuff is really hard to control. The replacements, again, big blue stem would be a possibility. The cattail, and none of these get as tall as the carrizo. And then there is a square stem spike rush that can also, I'm sure trying to find that would be difficult. I think the blue stem and the cattail are pretty easy to find. But these would be replacements for the giant cane. Johnson grass, I think we all know about this one. It's considered one of the 6 most damaging weeds in the US. It is everywhere. It spreads by seed and rhizomes like these other things do. It forms whole monocultures that keeps anything else from growing in there. It really does like a disturbed land. It comes up and grows great along construction areas. It doesn't care where it grows. It's a generalist. And if it has frozen and cattle eat it after it has had a frost, the frost brings out cyanide compounds in the leaves and the stalk, and it can poison cattle. So people that raise this stuff for hay are always very careful to get that stuff harvested early and not risk it freezing, because if it freezes, it's not usable because it brings out the cyanide. Johnson grass is a huge problem for agriculture. A lot of herbicide is used to get rid of it. And what is interesting, in some of my research, I found out that because Johnson grass was introduced in the 1800s, the mid 1800s, by a guy by the name of Colonel William Johnson. And it had become a problem in Texas by 1895. And so the legislature made a law saying that planting Johnson grass on rented land is illegal. And then 6 years later, they created another law that fined the railroad companies for failing to control Johnson grass on rights of way. That was in 1902. So this stuff has been around. We've known that it was a problem for over a century, and we're still fighting it. Now, what can you plant in its place? There. These are grasses that all have heads that are kind of like the Johnson grass. Switchgrass is a good one. Indian grass is lovely. I've got some right now and I'm enjoying it. And purple top. These all have nice colors to them, and they would be so much prettier than Johnson grass if we could get them in there. Now we're to our bastard cabbage. This is an annual. All these others were perennials. This is an annual, and their seeds sprout early. And the problem is they produce very large basal leaves that cover a large area of the ground, and they shade out our native seedlings. So when various natives try to come up, they are underneath those leaves and they don't make it. So it forms a monoculture. It produces these little bitty seed flowers. These are cute little flowers, but there are lots of flowers on there. And so they produce thousands of seeds, tiny little seeds. And when the wind blows and those flower heads start swaying, it gets thrown around. So this stuff can cover a field in 2 years. I've watched it happen around here. It is really, really a problem. Now, what's interesting is that Dr. Mark Simmons, who passed away, sadly, he was at the Wildflower Center, and back in 2005, he was doing some research on how we could get rid of this stuff without using a herbicide, because the herbicide was becoming a problem. And so he planted, I believe it was bluebonnets, Indian blanket, and I forgot what the third one was. Oh, it was Monarda. Overseeded it in areas that had a lot of this bastard cabbage to see if maybe the natives could outcompete the stuff. And come to find out, Indian blanket can do it. And so he was promoting that we use Indian blanket, overseed areas that have a lot of this stuff in it, to outcompete the bastard cabbage and not allow it to produce more seeds. It's not bulletproof, but it's certainly helpful. And he was encouraging places like the highway department, to look into it. I don't know that it's gone very far. We know this. I still see a lot of this stuff proliferating around the area. So I don't know. So what do you plant? Well, Indian blanket, definitely. And wildflowers. You can pull up the bastard cabbage if you get to it soon enough. But it's got one heck of a taproot and it puts it down fast. So if you can get babies, you can do it. And I know they tried doing that at the Wildflower Center, and it was just too labor intensive. So plant that Indian blanket. So Douglas Tallamy said, it will be the plants that we use in our gardens that determine what nature will be like in 10, 20, and 50 years from now. And that's true. If we can stop planting some of these things and plant our natives, it'll be a huge improvement. And then I love, this is often quoted by Margaret Mead, but I really do like it. Never doubt what a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So, yes, thought may be small, but we are mighty. Anyway, this is the disclaimer that I'm supposed to say, is that this plant list is only a recommendation and has no legal effect in the state of Texas, except for the few that are on its list. This is, I'm taking these off of texasinvaders.org, but it's not official. Question?
Hi, Deedy. There's lots of questions in the chat, and Bill and Meg and I are going to try to go through them.
Okay.
I want to thank you for that tip on the Indian blanket. I've got a bunch of seeds in a roadside that needs it. So guerrilla gardening. that's next.
It works.
Next week, I'm going to be out there spreading those seeds. That's a great tip. Thank you so much. I was wondering what I was going to do with those. Let's see. Someone wants to know what's the best way to get rid of Johnson grass.
You've got to get the rhizomes. If you can't get the rhizomes, it's going to keep coming up. So that means you can knock it down with a herbicide if you use it very judiciously. I'm not a huge fan of it. And then you got to dig it. You've got to get those rhizomes out. It takes a while.
Yeah. So persistence, that's how you get rid of it. And if it goes to seed, be sure you clip the seeds. Don't let them fall.
Cut them off. Put them in the trash.
Okay. Okay.
We have a question about whether butterfly bush, what is butterfly bush? Is it the same thing as vitex?
No, butterfly bush is Delia. It is also becoming invasive.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like, the flowers kind of look like the vitex, but it's a different plant. But yeah, I've had one and then discovered that they are becoming invasive. So it's not a good thing to plant.
It's hard to convince people not to use that plant, though. Boy, they want to.
And I keep seeing it being recommended by all kinds of people, and it's like, y'all, you're supposed to be experts. You don't recommend non-native.
I agree. And they'll recommend highly adapted. Well, doesn't that sound like the next invasive plant?
Like that line is about to go up the chart? Yes.
Yes, it does. Don't plant that. And the lantana camera, sorry for my misspelling on that in the chat. I've seen that in South Africa as big as an RV. And
and actually, they introduced it into Australia. Well, lantana in general, they introduced into Australia, and it is now illegal to plant it. It has absolutely, kind of like the rabbits that they brought into Australia, it's gone insane. So yeah, the camera comes from the West Indies and South America.
Mm-hmm. It's an invasive plant worldwide.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's a bad one. I've seen it on Galveston Island and some pretty big
yeah.
stands of it. And I've seen it growing, starting to get really big here in Fort Worth.
Yeah.
As we have drier and drier spells. So, yeah. Let's see, somebody asked me if the invasive committee was going to take on the
PDA?
making plants illegal. Well, anything's possible with a
True.
group of dedicated people, right?
That's right. Margaret Mead is right. We haven't made any decisions one way or the other, but it is a very long process. And they have it on their website. They go step by step by step what all you have to do. It is quite involved.
I put the a link to the website on the chat.
Okay. And if you get the handouts, it is on that too.
Very good. And just so everyone knows, the chat will be put into that eventually, into that same Dropbox.
And Kathy Saucier says, I would like to ask the state board to put together a rule for chapters not to promote non-native invasive species in their sales.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
I think, Kathy, there is nothing preventing you from bringing that up and making issuing a proposal at a state board meeting or prior to the meeting, submitted it to the executive board, and then it could be taken to the board.
Yeah.
So
that is correct. All members can communicate with the executive board members, propose rules, guidelines, and we'll take it up.
Yeah, I think we should, because I do know a lot of chapters that will, they sell stuff like plumbago or Pride of Barbados, or that, yeah, they're good plants and everything, but no, they're not native. And our name is Native Plant Society.
We really need to promote that. I love it. Somebody said, do you remember when the state legislature thought crepe myrtle were natives?
Yes. I know people who still do.
I saw somebody did a volcano thing halfway up a crepe myrtle trunk, and people were going, "Oh, don't do that," on Facebook. And my comment was, "Well, at least they're trying to kill it."
Yeah. Well, and crepe myrtles are starting to break out of cultivation.
Yes.
They're starting to spread seeds that are viable. So
yes, I'm seeing that invasional lag. I'm seeing them.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Also, I just wanted to make a comment about the use of herbicides. We actually have a policy. No, what is it? A statement, basically. It's not a policy per se. A position statement on insecticides, herbicides, and I can actually put a copy of that into handouts. I'll do that right now.
Yeah,
I think that would be useful to use.
Yeah,
that would be useful. And I did send that recently to the chapter presidents as well.
Good.
Mm-hmm. So the more dissemination that gets, the better.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not to say we can never, ever use herbicides, but they need to be used very judiciously and very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. It's best. And it's scary to walk down the Home Depot, or maybe I shouldn't mention a particular store, Lowe's, all of them, and see the poison aisle.
Yes. Yes, it is. And it's not just the herbicides, it's also all the insecticides. And we're wondering why we're losing insects.
Why? I think homeowners do more damage than people realize. And someone asked, why do they call it Texas lilac, what Texas chase tree, things like that? Because they want to convince you that it's a Texas native and they want you to buy it. Yeah. And it is not. And so when you find that out, be sure you tell that nursery owner or that manager of that department that you don't appreciate that. Mm-hmm. It's misleading, it's not true, and you want them to quit selling it and for them to sell native instead. And maybe take a list with you that Deedy provided. You could sell all these instead.
Right.
Yes, that would be great. Elizabeth McGreeny says plant catalpa instead of the tree of heaven.
Yeah.
this makes me wish I had 5 acres, all these cool native plants that I want to plant.
Yeah, well, you have a forest. Well, and again, what I have, the plants that I had are things that should do good in Comal County.
Yeah.
And in our environment. And that's not all of them. I mean, I just chose some. Sometimes it was really hard to find something that would be a good replacement. But that's why we need individual chapters to send us a list of the invasives that are really bad in their area and what would be a good replacement in their ecoregion, so that we can compile it and put it online so people can look it up.
Right. So you can tell that nursery, hey, the Native Plant Society has it online.
Right. Well, take it with you and point to the names.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's so much privet in Fort Worth. There's just these dead forests that don't have anything but privet in them. It's very sad.
And that's where some of our tax money goes whenever the city or the county or the state has to clean that out of parklands and stuff. Yes, they do get volunteers, but still, it's a constant clean out.
Yeah, but if you can find, if you can really try to do an economic study and see how much it costs to fight that plant versus how much benefit it does for selling for the growers and the nurseries, etc. That's how states are starting to make plants illegal. South Carolina just made, let's see, Bradford pear and then another plant illegal to sell this last summer.
Yeah. Well, they're selling here. Yeah, the problem is that we are talking about some plants that are the bread and butter of many nurseries. So this is an economic thing. It's not just an ecological thing. I've talked to some friends that they're in our chapter. They've been in landscaping forever, and they basically use natives, but then they throw in some other things because that's what people want, and they have to make a living. So there's a lot of education that needs to go on along with making things. The other thing that kind of ticked me off, there's a nursery out on 35. Several years ago, I was out there looking for something else, and they were selling Arundo Donax, and they were selling Chinese tallow and a couple of other things. And so I went in and I said, hey, TDA says you're not supposed to be selling this stuff. Why are you selling it? He went, so people want it.
Oh, I would have turned him in.
Well, it was a weekend, and so you have to wait till Monday to do it.
Yeah.
I'm tempted to go back out there and turn him in. However, I don't know how much the TDA does.
Well, you have to try it. You have to do a test. Say, I'm watching. Let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, it definitely turned. Oh, Rachel, what a good idea. Rachel says to start a chapter in Waco, she suggests sponsoring an information booth at next year's Texas Tree Conference. That's a really good idea. I had another person tell me the other day, why don't we have booths at realtor conferences and TNLA? I know that Meg has been working on getting us a booth there, I think.
Yeah.
Also they put out publications. Ads are expensive. Maybe that could be something we could do a capital campaign on to pay for some ads. I mean, they're hundreds of dollars to do a one-page ad, even thousands sometimes.
Oh,
but
yeah.
it might be worth it. And it's how you start to, we plant the seed and we change people's minds that way.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that we've talked about doing is putting together some kind of a little flyer to give to realtors, to give to new homeowners.
Excellent.
Because where we are, I mean, we have people coming from all over everywhere that know nothing about what it's like here, which is one of the reasons I think our chapter is growing so fast. We have a lot of newbies to NIPSOT that are joining that because they want to know, what can I plant?
And I think the whole idea of native plants and being things that are for your ecoregion is starting to become, the public in general is starting to become more aware of it. Yeah. So we're doing a good job on our outreach.
We just need to keep it up.
Keep it up. Get louder. We need to get louder. Y'all are good. Everybody that's here, I know we're the troops, aren't we?
Yes, we're talking to the choir.
It's okay. We're all inspiring each other.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any questions? Any other questions they want to ask Deedy? Let me move down here.
Well, the question came up about about grasses, because we talked about a lot of grasses that are not good to plant.
Yes.
And I think, so do you want to address turf grasses and what's available and what their requirements are, and maybe other ground covers that might be useful in shade? Or
Yeah, they're in terms of grass, the Wildflower Center and Native American Seed sell a mix of 3 short grasses that are about 6 inches tall that can be seeded, but that really needs to be done in the spring. You've got to get it going. And it's not going to look like your Bermuda grass or your St. Augustine. You know, it's going to be sponge grass. Buffalo is part of it. Curly mesquite. I forgot what the third one is.
blue grama.
Blue grama. And so it's attractive, but it does need sun. It will not grow in the shade. So you need other ground covers, and there are a number. Frog fruit, for instance.
Yeah.
We're doing our plant sale, and we did a pre-sale for the workers, and then we opened it to our members. We had a whole lot of frog fruit, and we're out. We've already sold out, and our sale day is Saturday. You know, so we're not going to have any for the public. But it's out there. You know, it's in people's yards now. Frog fruit's a good one. The old horse herb are the what's the other day? The straggler daisy. That stuff wants to grow. It's hard to kill out. People gripe about it all the time, and it's like, my Lord, let it grow.
Let it grow.
Because you can mow it, you can edge it. It's a great, and it also has tiny, tiny little yellow flowers that all the little bitty insects and many beneficials like, because they're tiny. So that's another good one. I just discovered one that's a little bit taller, and it's the native, one of the wild petunias that freely reseeds a lot. It came up in my daughter's yard 2 years ago. I dug it and asked Manette Marr, what is this? You know, I could get it fairly close, and she identified it for me. And she commented, she said, you can plant it as a ground cover, and it blooms most of the year. It kind of looks like the Mexican petunia, but it's not. It's a little bit different leaf. But anyway, there's another one if you can deal with a taller ground cover. And believe it or not, and Meg can back me up on this, you can use Turk's cap if you trim it to a foot or so.
What?
And it will grow. Get your string line out and go after it. It will grow, it will bloom, and it will do fine. It grows in sun or shade.
Cedar,
there are a lot of
there are a lot of ground covers that are great, right?
Yeah, there are. So yeah.
So cedar, some other grasses that you might plant on edge would be Canada rye, and inland sea oats does really well in the shade and on edges. Some cedar sage is awesome. It's it's really wonderful for spreading. I planted like 3, and now I have thousands under my cedars, and it's wonderful. Somebody mentioned
Briarleaf sage is another one. It freely spreads too, and it is evergreen.
Yeah, and the sedges, cedar sedge.
Yes,
that actually looks like a grass, even though it's not.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
there's
quite a few.
Bunch of stuff you can plant.
Yeah.
And I think you just have to re-envision what a lawn looks like. You have to decide how much of your yard you want to turn into a lawn and how much you would just like to have covered in natives.
Yeah.
Have that pocket prairie in the middle and keep your edges 1 mower width wide, one real mower, that you don't, not a power mower, just one you push. I got one for my birthday last year.
You use it?
I have used it.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
And also remember that if any seed mixes you get or plants that you get should really fit your neighborhood, not your neighborhood, but your habitat, your ecoregion.
Yes,
So we may
definitely.
make recommendations that are not necessarily good for your area. So you kind of have to start there. Got to start with your ecoregion and then figure out what's good in that ecoregion for your plants.
Right.
Well, and that's again why we need to put together a database. What could we plant instead of Asiatic jasmine? But it's going to vary by where you live.
Right.
And go on field trips to areas to places in your area that are uncontaminated and see what's growing there.
Yeah.
And go there once a month and see what's growing there. See
Yeah.
what would be a good landscaping plant for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean,
You don't know.
I have Texas grama is almost created the turf on my front yard now. It's gotten so thick. It's amazing. So it is interesting to see what'll happen, if you just kind of let it go. Pull out all the invasives and see and throw some seed out and see what happens.